All right, welcome everybody. We're at the top of the year, so we do want to go ahead and get started. You are at the Climate Organizing During the Pandemic panel. We're delighted to have you here today. I think it's going to be just a wonderful panel for us. I will introduce myself. My name is Donald Adju. I'm the Southeast Director for Citizens Climate Lobby, and we really appreciate you all being here today and spending your Saturday with us. At the end of this session, you'll be able to walk away with a better understanding of how we can advance climate action in the age of COVID. Today, we're going to have an opportunity to hear from Ben Pendergrass, our Director of Government Affairs, who will be talking about how to work with Congress during our current COVID-19 world. Flannery Winchester, our Director of Communications, will be talking about messaging in our media work. Madeline Para, our Vice President of Programs, will be giving us some information on how we can take action right from home. And Clara Fang, our Student Engagement Coordinator, will be talking up all the amazing things that students are doing all over the country. We'll have a format so that way we'll take some questions after each panelist, but we also have a large block of time set aside after all four panelists have gone for Q&A as well. So if you don't get your question answered right after a particular speaker goes, save those till the end and we'll try and get to as many as we possibly can for y'all today. So let's start with working with Congress in a COVID-19 world. I'd love to introduce Ben Pendergrass. He's our Director of Government Affairs for Citizens Climate Lobby. Ben spent a lot of time on the Hill and has a lot of wonderful insights that he'll get to share with us right now. I'll turn it over to Ben.
Good afternoon. I have to say, whoever convinced me it was a good idea to talk after Dr. Hayhoe is no longer my friend. So just note that. But I'm here to talk about working with Congress in a COVID-19 world. And like all of us, Congress is adapting to working remotely and is rightly very focused on responding to the COVID-19 crisis. They are not in DC, and most legislative work is stopped besides the negotiations around COVID relief bills. Right now, there are no committee meetings or hearings, and no legislation is being debated on the floor of either chamber, besides the House vote last Thursday on the latest small business relief bill. Both members and staff are adjusting to working remotely. This is not something Congress has really done before, and they continue to try to figure out how to do their jobs. They have really kind of become caseworkers rather than legislators, working to make sure their constituents are getting unemployment benefits, that hospitals have the supplies they need, and the state and local governments have the support they need. We really don't know for sure when Congress will go back into regular session, and even what it will look like when they do. It's entirely possible that even when they return, in-person meetings might be discouraged for the foreseeable future. Congress is having ongoing discussions right now of how to get work done under these conditions. And it's important to remember, every Hill office is its own fiefdom, and different offices are going to respond differently to the world we are living in right now. But we do know the climate crisis is not going away, and many of you, like us, are still impatient for Congress to take action. But we do need to acknowledge the current crisis and accept that this is where the focus is going to be in the near term. It's also important to remember it's not just climate that's taking a back seat right now. Really, everything is. We must also be cognizant of, besides responding to COVID-19 as policymakers, members and staff are also dealing with the challenges in their own daily lives that we all are. And like many of us, they might be finding their bandwidth tested in new ways. So a lot of people are wondering, what is the CCL DC Government Affairs team doing right now? Well, we also are adjusting to the new reality. We are not going to the meetings, in-person events, and briefings that once would have filled our weeks, but we are continuing to communicate with Hill staff. We're doing a lot of communicating with our partners and allies, and most importantly, we are trying to figure out what a post-COVID world means for action on climate. People are also wondering, what are our volunteers up to right now? Well, they are continuing to speak to their members of Congress. We are encouraging CCL volunteers to respect the competing priorities both members of Congress and staff are dealing with, and want them to have a message like, we're here, how can we help? But because of the relationships that CCL volunteers have built over the years, they are continuing to have virtual meetings and phone calls with their members of Congress. For example, 2 members of Congress recently joined CCL chapter meetings in just the last couple of weeks. And even though in-person events are on hold, other virtual events are still planned, and members of Congress are planning to participate. Like the town hall one of our CCL chapters in Utah had planned with Congressman Curtis. That will now be a virtual event. It has changed, but the hard work of CCL volunteers to build political will for a livable world most certainly has not stopped. People are also wondering when's going to be the right time to refocus Congress's attention on climate. You know, honestly, this is really hard right now because we're very much in the middle of the current crisis, but we will know it when we see it. The climate crisis is not going away. We will continue to see the real world impacts. Nothing about this crisis is going to make extreme weather events suddenly go away or wildfires less likely. Right now, the Earth's oceans are experiencing record high temperatures, and 2020 is already on track to be the warmest year on record. Climate continues to be a pressing issue, and once this current crisis abates, we will absolutely want to refocus Congress's attention on it. People are also asking, what can we learn from this present situation? Well, perhaps most relevant to CCL's efforts to pass a carbon price with a dividend, we will come out of this with an example of how you get checks to most American households. CCL has always advocated for a dividend model with monthly payments to protect poor and middle income Americans as we transition to a low carbon economy. We have just seen wide bipartisan support for a very similar idea to respond to an economic crisis. Though this is not the way we want it to happen, we are getting a real world example of how air quality improves when you burn fewer fossil fuels. We are learning the importance of listening to the science and being prepared, and we are learning it makes a lot more sense to take action now to transition to a low carbon economy in ways that are more efficient and do not disrupt the economy or Americans' lives. Lastly, I think the most important lesson is that, like the current crisis, climate cannot be a partisan issue. Climate change is global and it impacts Republicans and Democrats alike. We will have to continue to work to take the partisanship out of climate and make certain action is taken regardless of which party controls Congress or the White House. And a lot of you are probably wondering, how does the current COVID crisis impact the chance for major climate legislation this year and next? Well, we were already dealing with a shortened congressional calendar between the election and the impeachment proceedings, which made passing a major bill difficult. And honestly, the calendar just got a lot shorter and a lot more difficult. Congress's attention is going to be on responding to the COVID crisis and its accompanying economic fallout. Chance of passing a major climate bill like the Energy Innovation Act is probably pretty slim. However, that doesn't mean we are giving up. Progress can be made that will make the possibility of a bill passing next year all that more likely. We can make sure that when the Energy Innovation Act is reintroduced, it is from a position of strength. During the remainder of this Congress, we can continue to add co-sponsors. We can make sure all current co-sponsors returning to the next Congress will be ready to sign on as soon as it's reintroduced. We can begin moving more of the co-sponsors to being real champions of the bill. And we can continue to build the broad and deep coalition needed to pass major climate legislation. There are other smaller pieces of climate legislation that we might have the opportunity to pass this Congress. CCL volunteers would be familiar with some of these as secondary or supporting asks from previous lobby days. They won't address the climate crisis on their own, but they move the ball in the right direction and could make it easier to do the major policies we know are needed. The chance to pass some of these bills in the near term has not evaporated, and by continuing to push them, there's still a chance to get some wins in the near future. We will be looking for opportunities to advance some of these in the summer and fall. And lastly, many of you have probably heard some discussion of trying to get clean energy provisions or climate provisions into some of the stimulus bills being pushed through Congress. We are watching this very closely, but right now the chances are pretty slim. Because these bills are really being shaped almost exclusively by leadership, there really are just very limited opportunities. And of course, it makes sense that if they do start debating a major infrastructure bill, climate should be included in that debate and should be a major consideration, and such a bill should include provisions for a cleaner, more resilient country. I'll just wrap up before I take questions to say, there's no denying that the current crisis will have an impact on our work with Congress. But we can and will continue to push Congress to take the bold action that is necessary to address climate change.
Well, thank you, Ben. That's great. Well, let me throw it over to Tamara for any questions.
Yeah, sure. So there's talk floating around about bailing out and giving more subsidies to fossil fuels. Shouldn't we be opposing these subsidies since it goes against what we're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty simple answer. They were already in a over-leveraged and indebted position before, and I don't believe there might be some action on the Hill that we can engage in, but far more likely, we could just see financial institutions and investors abandoning some of these fossil fuels as just being straight up bad investments. But I think it would certainly behoove a lot of us to be cognizant of that these are Americans that have jobs in these industries, and we don't want any American to be out of work. And so I think in our response to any legislative framework that comes out, looking at any industry, we need to keep that in mind as well.
Great. Another question is, do we expect an infrastructure stimulus bill that could include some climate solutions like alternate transportation, EV charging, strong energy efficiency, et cetera?
It's possible. And like I said, if the opportunity presents itself, right now things are very fluid. Members of Congress don't know how they're going to pass even some of the major pieces of legislation they need to pass this year, like defense authorization bills. They're not having any committee markups or hearings. And so they're figuring out how they can do the work that needs to get done just on anything, let alone like a major bill like that. Right now, the bills that have been voted on have been done through abnormal legislative practices, to say the least, and have really only been negotiated between the Senate and House leadership and the White House. So that dynamic makes it very difficult to have much control over what does get included and what's not get included. But I think CCL volunteers are probably chomping at the bit to have their voices heard in this discussion, and I think they will be.
Great. Another question is that partisanship seems to have grown during the pandemic. Any suggestions about how to deal with it?
I like this is a question for another panel discussion now. I don't know if that's completely true. Online polling is always an interesting thing, and we have seen there is a pretty broad consensus in some of the polling that's been out there around people saying that staying at home and being safe, I think, has 70 to 80% approval right now. So we do see some partisan cracks emerging, but I think those are like a more minority viewpoint. I think most people would prefer to see this not be a partisan issue. I think would be the general consensus.
Okay, great. Well, has Congress figured out how it will debate and vote?
They have not. There had been some discussion of letting members vote remotely, which has gone nowhere. There had been some opposition, even leadership couldn't agree on it. So they are doing different things. The Senate has it a lot easier than the House because the Senate operates on what's called the principle of unanimous consent. So they don't need to have all the senators there, just as long as there's broad agreement on the bill. Because if nobody objects, they can pass bills. Where the House has to have more members physically there. And so what they've been doing is they've been getting the bare number of members back just to pass these things, but they've really not figured out how they're going to do the kind of regular work that goes into legislating yet.
I'd love to introduce Flannery Winchester. She's our Director of Communications with Citizens Climate Lobby. And Flannery has lots of experience with how we can best message, especially in this new environment we find ourselves. So with that, I'll throw it over to Flannery.
Thank you so much, Don, and thank you everyone for being here. So as Don said, we're going to talk about messaging and media work on climate change during the COVID-19 crisis. So first off, what do we mean when we say messaging? Well, very simply, messaging is just an agreed upon way to talk about a topic. And having clear messaging helps us do our work more effectively across the country because it keeps us all on the same page with what we're saying. When we put out a clear message, it's easier for our communities, the media, and Congress to hear it. So for those of you who may be new to CCL, this is just something that we do to stay coordinated. It doesn't mean that you're required to say or write these things word for word, but they can inform your work and help guide it in a productive direction. So we've developed some recommended messaging on climate change during the COVID-19 pandemic. First, it's important to acknowledge COVID at the beginning. So whether you're starting a conversation with someone or you're writing something for the media, before you launch into the topic of climate change, you want to first acknowledge that we're in a stressful and uncertain time, and people need to take care of themselves, their families, or their communities. And if you're talking to Congress specifically, you should acknowledge the big burden that they're under right now to support their constituents' safety, health, and well-being. So for the time being, this really should be your starting place. And then once you've acknowledged that, then you can say that climate change is still a critical problem that we need to address. That's an important message to put out there. It's not going away. So when the immediate crisis of the pandemic has passed, we do still need our government to turn its attention to solve this ongoing issue. So with that stage set, here are 5 key messages that you can use to talk about climate change in the context of the pandemic. First, pandemics and climate change are disruptive. Let's work to limit that disruption. So with COVID-19, it's become really clear just how big disruptive events put strain on our lives and our communities. We've seen it upend the economy, upend our day-to-day lives. And now that the whole world understands that more acutely, this message will help you sort of make the point that we can and should work to limit the number of disruptive events that we have to deal with because of climate change. And I'm sorry if you can hear my dogs in the background. Hold on just 1 second.
Nothing like the joys of working from home.
Exactly. Okay, so the second message is that science should guide our crisis responses. So COVID-19 has really shown us the importance of public health and medical experts and listening to their expertise. And so in climate and energy policy, we can make the point that we also need the input of scientists here to inform sound policy and a good way forward. A third message you can put out is that when we act together, we can be successful. So for COVID-19, we've needed to stay home, to practice social distancing, and it has helped limit the spread of the virus. We've also seen it result in cleaner air in many cities. It's showing us just how much burning fossil fuels is impacting the environment around us. And of course, staying home is not going to solve climate change. It's not something we can do forever, but it's clear that we can make a big impact when we all pull in the same direction. So collectively, we can support action at a national level by putting a price on carbon. A fourth message is that it's important to act as soon as possible. So as we've seen with COVID-19, a lack of early action has led to the problem getting larger and harder to deal with. What started off as a manageable challenge has ended up as a serious crisis. So if we act now to transition to clean energy, we can meet the challenge of climate change and avoid the worst impacts. So that's another connection you can make between the two topics. And then a fifth message that you can share is that we can have a healthy economy in our modern lives, and we can solve climate change at the same time. So reacting to COVID-19 has forced us to shut down large portions of the economy, but this is not ultimately how we want to reduce emissions. We support a policy to reduce emissions that is designed to support a healthy economy, to increase employment, and to benefit people in a lot of different ways. So when we restart our economy, a policy like that will help us make different energy choices, which are cleaner and healthier. And just one quick note, so that's a lot of suggestions of helpful things that you could say. And one quick note about something that we don't recommend saying. We don't recommend saying that this pandemic shows that to have a clean environment, we need somehow zero human activity, or we need to crash the economy. And we also don't recommend saying things like humans are the virus, because the problem is not actually human activity itself, but rather the fossil fuels that are powering that activity. So if we power our activity with clean, safe energy sources, then we can have a healthy economy and a healthy climate. So, and I'll just take just a moment here to remind folks that when I'm finished, we'll have some Q&A, but I will also be able to get to your Q&A questions. If I can't answer them live, I'll type in the answers. So we also have a few key messages about CCL itself during this time, which might be helpful for you to share in community conversations or in media work. So those of you who are already active in CCL, you might feel like you know these already. And those of you who are new, I hope that you get plugged in with your local chapter and discover these things for yourself. But one thing that's true about CCL is we provide comfort to one another as we confront big challenges. So our supporters are ordinary people like you, like me, who live across the US and the world, and we're subject to the impacts of COVID-19. We're feeling it, we're all living through it. And it's a scary and uncertain time. Over the years, as we've confronted climate change, we've already been supporting each other in our local chapter meetings, through our trainings, and at our conferences. And as best we can, we're now supporting each other in the face of COVID-19 as well. A second message you can share with people about CCL is that we work together to solve big problems. So COVID-19 has reminded us that even while keeping our distance, we really rely on each other. And CCL's approach to solving climate change has always started with people. We work by building relationships with each other, with folks in our local communities, and with our members of Congress. And we're especially glad now to have those relationships in place and to have tools and training that help us further build those skills. It feels like we need that more than ever during this crisis. And then a third message you can share with people or with the media about CCL is that we are an optimistic bunch. We believe that we can solve our problems if we work on them. So our founder, Marshall Saunders, used to quote a writer named Alex Steffen, and he used to say, optimism is a political act. Those who benefit from the status quo are perfectly happy with a large population of people who believe that things can never get any better. In fact, these days, cynicism is obedience. And what's really radical is being willing to look directly at the magnitude and difficulty of problems that we face and still insist that we can solve those problems. So in CCL, we put that optimism into practice on climate change, and we can use it when we're facing other problems too. So those 3 points are good messages to share when you're letting people know about CCL, even as this pandemic is going on. So now that you have those messaging points in mind, I'd like to touch briefly on the media opportunities that you may be able to take advantage of during this time. And media work is unique because it's very social distancing friendly. It can still happen remotely in much the same way that it normally would. So you can really go full steam ahead here. So first I'd like to do a quick poll to find out what media activities you may already be doing. Since we've been a few weeks now into the pandemic atmosphere, let me know, have you guys been writing letters to the editor? Have you written an op-ed? Have you maybe had articles about your chapter or your climate work? Or have you not heard of these media activities before? Are you not sure what's been working in your chapter? So let me know there in the poll. And if we could go ahead and take a look at the results so far. Awesome. So it looks like 55% of you guys have written letters to the editor since this began. So that is fantastic. And then there's also folks who've been submitting op-eds, and then we've got some folks that are not sure what all this is about. So we'll talk through it. Thank you so much for sharing that with me. Probably the lowest hanging fruit right now, and we see this reflected in the numbers, is to write LTEs and op-eds. And this is a great way to put these messages that we just talked about out into your community via your local newspaper. So you can work together within your chapter to write these letters, to give feedback to each other on what you're writing. And then you can send your piece into the newspaper remotely. And then when you get things published, you can share those pieces on social media to continue spreading the word about climate change and about your work. So another opportunity that is somewhat new in the activities of CCL is trying to generate news coverage of how your chapter is adapting and continuing climate advocacy under these circumstances. So you can connect with local journalists, newspaper, TV, radio. You can work with them or you can reach out to them on social media while we're all working online rather than in person. And send them press releases, pitch them story ideas along these lines and that highlight these messages. And you can try to get CCL and your chapter's work in the local news. You could even try requesting a remote editorial board meeting to discuss these messages and ideas with your local newspaper's editorial board. And you could encourage them to write an editorial informed by these messages. So for those of you who answered that you're not sure, you don't know what's going on with these media opportunities, just want to highlight that we have lots of training videos and resources available for you in each of these areas that goes really in depth about what they are and how you can do them. And so that will be helpful for you to help you be successful in taking any of those actions. So that's the overview, and I have time now for a few questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Flannery. Cameron, do we have some questions for Flannery over there in the Q&A?
I'm scanning. Give me one moment here. How about approaching via letters, phone calls to congressional Senate candidates who may not be in office right now? Actually, I don't know. Flannery, you may be able to speak to that. I don't know if it's as much of a question for you as for Ben.
Yeah, I mean, that sort of straddles two areas, but that's more of what we would call grass tops engagement, which is people that are prominent in the community. And we do have trainings on our CCL community website that goes more in depth, but that might be something actually Madeline might be able to touch on in her section, or she could type it in the Q&A.
Okay, great. Sorry, I'm trying to read these quickly to find the ones for you, Flannery. Give me one second.
Problem. And I'm also happy to jump in there and type back to folks if we need to keep things moving.
Okay.
Flannery, I saw one that came through the chat. Given the challenge of meeting with editorial boards right now, how do you suggest folks go about trying to set up even a virtual meeting?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I would say probably that it depends on your existing level of relationship with the editorial board. So if these are people that you have met with once a year, you're in somewhat regular contact with them, and it wouldn't be out of the blue to ask them for a phone call or something like that, then you could certainly start there. But if you are starting to reach out to the editorial board, this is the first time that you've done it, then I would suggest starting by with an introduction, letting them know sort of who you are in the community, what you're working on, that you're a local climate advocate, sharing with them some initial information, probably in the form of what we call editorial packets. That's something that we create from the staff level here at CCL to equip people to reach out to editorial boards. So you could send them that packet as a way to sort of gauge their interest in this topic, and then request to set up either a phone call or a video conference to walk through the information in the packet and let them know more about what you have going on in the community. So yeah, I think that gets it.
Cool, thank you.
Okay,
Sure.
Flannery, here's a question. Which topics do you suggest for op-eds?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I will put a link in the Q&A that directs to some guidance that we've given on this. But essentially the messages that we went through, you can use those as the foundation for your topic, right? So if one of the messages is, that we should be guided by scientific experts when we deal with a major crisis, you could write an entire op-ed, and an op-ed is usually 600 to 700 words, so it's not too long, but you could write an entire op-ed that talks about what the science told us about pandemics and about dealing with a health crisis of this scale, and then you could transition into the parallels of what science is telling us about dealing with climate change and how we need to act on both. So the messages, you can use those to inspire op-eds and flesh them out more fully.
Okay, great. Another question is Facebook and our Twitter content differences that you could speak to?
Oh, sure. So first I'll say that social media, just because they have the word media in them does not mean that they are really the same thing. Social media is kind of its own unique beast. And social media is something that you can use to do all sorts of work. You can use it to connect with your members of Congress, or to do media type work, interact with journalists, or to connect with other people in your community. So it's really versatile. It's not just a sort of a media thing. But I would say that on Facebook and Twitter, you can do the same thing in terms of using the messages, just it's not going to be 600 or 700 words. It's going to be, 280 characters. But you can put these same types of messages out on those platforms as well, to get conversations started, to help steer the conversation that your friends and family are having about these topics. You can try to steer them in a direction that is helpful, and that makes these connections between the current crisis and climate change.
Fantastic. Awesome. Well, thank you, Flannery. Very much appreciated. I'm sure that we'll have some more questions for you at the end of our panel. But let's go ahead and move on. We're going to move on to taking action from home. And I'm delighted to introduce our speaker, Madeline Parrish. She's our Vice President of Programs. Madeline has a long history of working with young children, which actually comes in really handy with CCL staff because we're basically all kids at heart. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Madeline.
Okay, thanks, Don. And it's true, I love kids and I love the kids inside ourselves. Even though some days I get up and wonder how I wound up in this alternate universe where the traffic is quiet and I spend so much time on Zoom, some things are still the same. And in particular, human nature hasn't changed. So how we work with each other to solve problems remains the same. At CCL, we believe that change comes about in the context of relationships. So your power to make a difference comes from your ability to communicate with other people, and you still have lots of ways to do that. So I'm going to cover 5 ways today, and I am pretty sure that a lot of you have been doing a lot of these things, and I'm like a kid with a new toy with this online Zoom polling, so we're going to do a lot of that. The things we'll cover are talking to people you know, building up your own skills and knowledge, building up your CCL chapter, working with one of our national action teams, and making sure that you and other people vote. So let's start with talking to people that you know. You've heard a lot about that already from Catherine Hayhoe. Since the pandemic started, my spouse and I have been checking in on friends and family more often than we used to because we worry about them. And I suspect it's not just us. So let's start there with one of those live polls and see what your experience has been. So if you're on the phone, I don't think you see these, but the question is, since the pandemic started, how much are you checking in with friends and family? So when I call my sister, first we catch up and make sure that we're each okay. And nowadays, we also sometimes talk about my work on climate change. And hopefully that's what you're doing too, checking in on how your loved ones are doing during the pandemic and the economy. And then sometimes it could be appropriate to introduce your concern about climate change into the conversation. I like phone or video calls because a conversation in real time lets me connect better. And it lets me read people's tone of voice or, deal with any questions that are coming up. So it's really also nice about communicating virtually because it extends our reach beyond who's right next to us to anywhere in the country or the world, and that's pretty cool. So looking at the poll results, far and away, I see that you guys are like that too, with 81% doing more than usual. Thank you, that's wonderful. Now, if you spend time on social media, you can post things there and encourage people to discuss them. And that's why one of our quick actions at the break was to post our Earth Day image on your social media account and use that to start a conversation. And because I'd like us in CCL to use social media even more intentionally, I'm curious to do another poll with you, and here it comes, to see what we can learn about our use currently. So this one asks, what social media platform do you use the most? And while you're doing that, here's a few topics for conversation that you could use either live or on social media. You could tell people about why you like volunteering for CCL or some other organization if that's where you volunteer. You could invite people to participate with you in something, for example, our June virtual conference, June 13th, or other online activities. And while you won't do that from the same location as someone else that you're inviting, most likely, you could plan to talk about it afterwards. Now we have a website called CCL Community for our members. It provides lots of education, and I'll talk more about that. But another thing you could do as you're talking to people and finding out what they're curious about is suggest resources either from CCL Community or from elsewhere. And then, you know, if some of your friends are community leaders, people who are clergy or maybe family members who are, or who are local elected officials or business owners or heads of organizations, you could talk to them about why you support the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act and encourage them to consider endorsing it on the website we have for doing that. And you've already heard about our monthly calling campaign. If you've got somebody who wants to take an action, that's a good one. They can sign up to call their member of Congress once a month. And again, that was one of the actions we suggested at the break. It's paused right now, but by signing up, people will be ready to swing back into action as soon as we can tell that Congress is ready to respond to that well. So let's see, looking at the social media results, a little more than half of us are Facebook users, some Instagram and Twitter, some other, and a quarter none. You know, I'll be honest, that was better than I expected, and maybe that'll grow while we have time to learn new things. Okay, so speaking of learning new things, let's move on to building up our skills and knowledge. So if a lot of your normal in-person events are canceled and you are someone who has some time on your hands, which I know isn't everybody, this could be a good time to deepen your knowledge. And again, let's see who's been doing this already. So here comes another live poll. Have you done something in the last month? For example, read a book or watch a video or participated in a webinar to learn more about something related to climate change or being a climate advocate. I know it could be 100% with you guys all being here today, but this is looking really high. That's very cool. So here are some thoughts in case you need some new ones. If you aren't familiar with our member website, CCL Community, you might just go there and click through the tabs. You can see them underneath the poll here on this slide and see what's there. You could use our CCL Community trainings, and those are written audio and video. So depending on your favorite mode, you could use those in the area that you're interested in to improve your background knowledge or skills. You could learn a new social media platform. Maybe some of us want to branch out to Instagram. And we have really great, short, easy to follow training videos on Community. You could participate in our live webinars or other online forums. We're really happy you're here today. And of course, it's not just us. You could take advantage of other climate organizations' offerings. There was so much great stuff this week. Okay, 92% have been diving into learning more. That's excellent. Let's talk about building up your CCL chapter next. This part is mostly aimed at people who are already part of a chapter. So we're going to ask another question and see how many of you on this breakout already belong to one. And while you're doing that, here's some ideas for building up your local group. You could help people in your chapter stay connected by calling them or by holding social events on Zoom or other creative ways. And especially by reaching out to new members or people who are just getting interested in joining, including people who have participated today for the first time. You could work with your group leader to find the right actions and projects that are based on our levers of political will and on your community's situation. We trust you to be figuring out the right thing in your communities because we're not all the same. And you got to remember, group leaders love people who volunteer to help. You could have help host Zoom parties. Those could be purely social, like a chapter happy hour, or they could be action parties, like meeting together to write letters to the editor, like Flannery was talking about, or to compose emails to people that you want to connect with about climate change, so people could buddy up via Zoom and read their thoughts and help each other out with composing those. Or if your chapter wants to go a little deeper, you could organize or help organize a virtual 5 levers workshop. This is a new workshop that we've developed to help chapters organize ourselves into effective teams. And if you're new to CCL, the 5 levers refer to the 5 core types of things we do, which includes lobbying Congress. See if I can do them from memory. Lobbying Congress, working with the media, doing grassroots engagement, reaching for those community levers, and something else I forgot. That's all right, they're good levers. Okay, so yep, 84% are in a chapter, but you can see, those of you who are in a chapter, there's some folks who you might want to reach out to afterwards. We'll try to help you connect. All right, next one, area number 4 of what we're covering. You could work with a national action team on outreach or skill development. Our national action teams enable people to work together to build support for the Energy Innovation Act or to improve their skills. So these are teams that have been working virtually across the country and sometimes beyond. Actually, even before the pandemic, we have over 50 of them, and you can see them, some of them here. The poll is covering up my slides, but that's okay. So let's ask here, how many of you belong to an action team, a national action team already? Here's a few I might like to highlight. We have a presenters team that does a wonderful job of supporting people to deliver presentations and has slide decks for you and a process for requesting presentations, and they'll help you learn how to do it online. Our climate and health team has extremely helpful background knowledge and a lot of insight about working with health organizations. So if you're interested in that area, I strongly advise you to connect with them. Our faith-based teams have also done a lot of great work in gaining support from religious leaders and organizations. So there's a lot more. Let's see. A little more than a third of you belong to one of our national action teams. And that was one of the reasons why I highlighted it. They're really great, and check it out. Okay, last area. Let's not forget that this is an election year and that voting makes a difference. So now let's just see how many of us are currently registered to vote. And I'm hoping it's a lot. If you didn't sign up on our CCL Turbo Vote link during the break, I encourage you to do it. You'll get voting reminders, information about registering and voting by mail, and election updates due to the pandemic. Now, I happen to live in Wisconsin, the state that made national news for its big battles over whether to hold or not hold our April primary. And I'm so glad that I had already voted by mail. I really saw firsthand how confusing that could get. So let's see, 98% registered to vote. Good, very good. So one of the things we might be doing is thinking about who else can we encourage to this. All right, that is the 5 areas I was going to cover. We might have a minute for a question or two, and remember, we'll have more time after our last panelist.
Madeline, do you have any tips for starting a new chapter now?
This is really interesting. Yeah, so it's going to be a lot like any other time, really, because people haven't actually changed. So as you're talking to folks, as you're introducing climate into the conversation, and in this case, you're going to be thinking closer to home. If you're starting a chapter of people around you, just look for the people who might be ready for that and ask them to do something with you. That might be listen to our info session. It might be write a letter to Congress together. Just start people to be in action and then help them want to continue in action. It will be harder right now because we have a lot of worries and stress and burdens now. And so you might also need to be patient, but just keep reaching for people one by one by one. I'm a really big believer in personal outreach.
Great. Another question is, do you have suggestions for connecting and engaging with new members beyond phone calls and Zoom meetings?
I don't. And in fact, although, you know, in normal times we've encouraged coffee breaks, in practice, phone calls and are usually what works out. And I've heard people say that folks these days are more likely to answer the phone than in other periods. So see if I'm right. See if that's true, and try the phone.
Great. Another question is if you have any suggestions on how to identify groups for Zoom climate presentations.
Yeah, and again, I would suggest working with our presenters action team because they've really developed how to do that. You can make your own list of organizations and cold contact them, but it's often best to start with the places where you or somebody you know has a relationship. So maybe that's your church or a social club, or maybe it's just a circle of your friends. So that's still the same really good way to work with people. It's just you're doing it virtually. In addition, one of the ideas that has surfaced from volunteers, and that's where I get my ideas from, is by seeing what you guys are doing out there, is that there are a lot of classroom teachers right now who are incredibly stressed trying to get all their science, and especially the science teachers or the political science teachers, who are having to figure out virtual stuff, and being offered a presentation could just be like a blessing to them. So that's a particular place you might look these days. I think we should go on to our last speaker, and then we can come back to other questions in that time we have after all of us have gone. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Madeline. Very much appreciated. We're going to move on to student educators and allies. I'm delighted to introduce Clara Fang. She's our student engagement coordinator with Citizens Climate Lobby. Clara has done an amazing job helping to organize students all across the country, and I'm delighted to turn over to her to talk about all the amazing work that's going on.
Thank you so much, Don.
Thank you.
So first, I am going to introduce a poll to find out if we have students on this call. So please answer if you are some kind of a student or educator at any level. So we know that students and educators are really impacted by this current crisis. Students in college are being sent home, living with their parents. Their classes have been moved online. Some students who don't have families are in even more challenging situations. So it's a really tough time for them. We are adapting to that. But we do have some advantages. So for example, in higher ed, we have experts in public health, in climate change, and these people are really great to be spokespeople for climate change. And most of our members love science and love to promote science, so we don't have any problems with that. They're tech savvy and adaptable and are already using video chats and social media a lot. For the most part, they're part of a tight-knit community, so it's great for networking and talking to friends about climate change. They're passionate, engaged, and energetic. And really the most important thing is young people's voices are powerful. And I'm going to highlight throughout my section how we're going to be doing that. So young people's voices are powerful in their family. So if this is a time where you're back home and spending more time with your parents or other family members is a great time to talk about climate change, just like Dr. Hayhoe said, or Madeline. Because talking about climate change is really the most important thing that we can all be doing. You can let them see that you are doing climate work from home. My student leaders are really involved, and leading a chapter or organizing climate events takes a lot of time, and they're very excited about it. So it's great when you let people see your enthusiasm for that. Can you successfully dialogue with family members who lean to the right politically? So that would be a really big help to us, since having Republican support for our bill is really important. Does your family know any community leaders who might support the bill, or reach out to other community leaders? So, as you're checking in with people and as they're able and interested, you can talk about these connections. You can join the Higher Education Action Team online, and social media is something you can certainly do from home. So we are on all these different programs. citizensclimatehighered.org is our website for students and educators. We have our own Facebook group, and we have Facebook, Twitter, and a MailChimp account where we can send out a monthly newsletter. Our signature program for working with students is the Campus Leaders Program. So in this program, students are really signing up to get climate advocate training and to start a climate campaign or a CCL chapter at their school. This is really great for us because it allows the students to exercise their political muscle. It lets them work on this issue with their peers, build up their community. And we find that it's really effective when they work together. So they're educating others about carbon pricing, rallying support for the climate policies, and they're getting mentored by CCL staff and regional fellows. So campus leaders can apply and join us through 2 tracks. The regular track is for students who are completely new to CCL. So for a semester, typically, they would join our 12-week climate advocate training, plan and implement 1 advocacy or outreach action at their school, and they can earn 1 credit or a certificate of completion for doing these activities. So people who complete the regular track go on to the accelerated track, or if these students already have experience with CCL and have come to our conferences, and they can jump right into the accelerated track. And here, we're really supporting them to plan and execute a campaign or lead a CCL chapter. And they can also earn 1 credit by working that out with their school and their advisor. So here's a sampling of some photos of our different chapters. We currently have around 50 campus chapters, I would say. It's very dynamic. We get new ones and drop them all the time. Every semester there's turnover. So we have students from University of Colorado Boulder who came to our conference last year and lobbied. A lot of them, it was their first time. Our students in the NYU chapter made a presentation to the UN during the UN Climate Summit. And we have students who got endorsements from their college president or sometimes the mayor of their towns. So they do all the things that our CCL chapters do. Another way that students can get involved with us is through internships. So we have internships with our national staff. We're working with our staff behind the scenes to organize our conferences, provide education to our volunteers, helping with outreach, to students or Latinos or all these various groups. So this is like a sampling of some positions that we offer. Students can also do internships with their local chapter leader or regional coordinator. And that's the website you can to apply. Another group that I work the most closely with are regional fellows. So regional fellows are students or recent graduates who have experience with campus organizing advocacy and are interested in engaging more young people in climate action. So they are mentoring the new campus leaders, the new students who are coming up behind them, and training them on how to do advocacy, and really being like a buddy and a cheerleader for them. I really love this group of students, and they help me reach people from all over the country. Hired allies are another group that I work with. So you don't have to be a student to be working with young people. A lot of our volunteers are really passionate about developing the younger generation of climate leaders. So we have people who are professors. We have people who are just non-students that are interested in working with students, you know, they do a lot. They're so helpful. We've had hired allies mentor campus leaders. They have helped find us connections with faculty members at their local universities. They have done road trips to give talks at universities or their alma maters. So they are a very important and large group that we work with. I provide a lot of resources for students and educators. So on our website, under the toolkit section, we have a variety of resources adapted for a higher education audience, from template presentations for a younger audience to a manual on how to do campus organizing, sample outreach emails, storytelling for young people, yeah, all kinds of stuff. And that's all free and on the public website. So among the things we do with students, and you can do this pandemic or not, our ongoing project of collecting student testimonials. So students, they submit a photo of themselves and a quote on why they support carbon pricing. And then that's kind of like a letter that we can then share during our lobby meetings, use on social media, you know, to help us tell the stories of these students and elevate their voices. We collect college and university president endorsements. This can often be quite a campaign, sort of like getting your member of Congress on board. And students are so good at this, you know, because they are the part of the university and who the president is interested in hearing from. You know, the presidents are not going to listen to me, but when their own student comes to ask them for an endorsement for Energy Innovation Act, then it's hard for them to say no. We also have a youth action team. So this is geared towards younger students in middle school and high school. So it's a space for young people to talk to each other and support each other with our climate advocacy. They have a monthly call on the second Wednesday of each month. They are developing a website and have some resources that are geared towards the younger audience. So coming up, we'll be doing some panels for the national conference focused on young people. So if you plan to attend that, we will have some educational sessions. I'm recruiting campus leaders to start chapters this fall. I think that things will be better by then. So it's totally something that students can still be doing, is joining us and spending their summer getting trained with us and becoming familiar with our work, and then being able to dive into the organizing once they get back on campus. We are also recruiting for fall internships. I received literally like hundreds of applications for our summer internships. So they filled up very fast. They're pretty much all filled up now. So if you apply now, it's for the fall, but it's a great opportunity. I will also be promoting the Climate Advocacy One Credit course. So I'm doing a PhD at Antioch University, and last year we had the idea to partner with CCL to offer a 1 credit online climate advocacy course that can be open to anyone. So students in that course go through the 12-week core volunteer training with Brett Cease, and then I provide some more additional instruction, and people can earn graduate university credit. All right, and then we have a monthly call. It's on the first Monday of each month at 9 p.m. Eastern, and this is a call that anyone interested in working with higher ed can join. And one more time, how to find us online on social media. So thank you so much. And I have time to take a few questions, right?
Absolutely. Thank you, Clara. Oh, yeah. Any questions, Tamara?
I'm skimming. What about getting letters to the editor and op-eds and editorials in campus newspapers?
Oh, yes. Great idea. And I have students who are doing that already. They are very interested in writing letters to the editor, and they have a good success rate publishing it on their campus papers. So yes, great idea.
I'm skimming for more questions for Clara. If you have any particular questions, she said no question, but loved your talk. There's that. Is it possible to do the Campus Leaders Program as a high school student?
Yes, it is. Yeah, so the high school students, have much of the same resources as college students to start a group. We do have some special guidelines for younger folks. Like if they are doing activities, they might need to be supervised with adults and things like that. So just ask us about those things, but pretty much the same thing as college students.
Great. And another question is if you need to identify as citizens climate education in a school as opposed to citizens climate lobby.
Yeah, good point. We definitely have had issues with using the word lobby. It can sound, I don't know, like a little too political in higher education. So yeah, students have used citizens climate education, or just like make up their own climate club name, and use that to start their campus chapter.
Great. We have a question about how to sign up for the graduate course that you mentioned.
Yeah, you can't sign up yet, but if you go to the Antioch University New England website and search, you'll be able to find last fall's syllabus. So you can see what that's going to be like. But I think we'll be opening registration in June.
Great. Another question is, how can teachers best get their students involved?
I think the best way is really to require it, like make it a part of your course and give, credit, make it a part of your assignment, to hear the presentation, or, the students can design a climate project of their own. That's so great, because then they really get that support and the structure to carry out a project.
And another question is, if the university president won't endorse the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, do you ask them to support carbon pricing more broadly, or what approach do you take?
Yes. I do think it's challenging to get them to support the Energy Innovation Act. So for the 53 endorsements that we did get, they are for carbon pricing. So that's like an approach, it's not so much a bill. And we do find that's a little easier. And I have a lot of resources on our website of like handouts you can download and talking points that can help you with that.
Great. Do you know if there's a forum available for middle school kids?
The Youth Action Team, yeah. So if you go to the main CCL Action Team page, then youth is one of those action teams.
Okay. And this person hasn't had much success getting an endorsement from a university president. What's the best approach or argument, she asks?
Recruit some students first. And then I would say, who are the people that the president listens to? At a university, they typically want to see support from their sustainability committee. That's a group of people that the college president would have put in charge of all things climate and sustainability related. So if you get their support, then they're going to be your allies in getting the president's endorsement.
Awesome. These are all excellent questions. I do want to just mention that we run our time for questions specifically for Clara, but we do have lots of time left for questions, so we can continue to ask Clara questions, and we can open up for the rest of the panelists as well.
Great. This is the next one that I was going to ask Clara, so I'll just go ahead and continue to ask that one. What does the process usually look like to explore potential for college credit with your university?
Good question. You mean like if you are a student doing one of the programs? It's really to talk with your academic advisor. You know, I do have an outline of what the training looks like. A university, like an independent study course, is usually like educational component or writing component. So if you propose it as a 1 credit independent study, that's how you can get credit for doing this work with us.
Great. One question for a different panelist would be, how do you think the need to help the economy will affect the increase or decrease of fossil fuel emissions? I'm thinking that might be for Ben, perhaps.
That's a hard question. I mean, not an economist, and we don't really know how things like various stimulus bills will play out. What competing priorities make it in, what get cut. So I think it's a little too soon to tell on that.
Okay, here's another one for you, Ben. Given the limited time and focus Congress has right now, what is the point of our June virtual lobby day?
They continue to need to hear that climate is an important issue from their constituents. We need to make sure that they understand that even though we are all very focused on the COVID crisis, and that is the most important thing right now, that going forward, climate crisis is going to be the major issue, and they can't completely take their eye off that ball.
Okay, great. And while you're there, stay there, Ben. Previously, CCL was hoping that we might get more Republican co-sponsors after the March primaries. When might we see more co-sponsors now?
Well, we still, there's still some primaries that have yet to be held, and I would honestly not expect to see a lot of co-sponsors come on during this crisis, just because members' attention is focused elsewhere. But we know they are continuing to have conversations with CCL volunteers. Volunteers have had several phone calls and virtual meetings with Republican members of Congress. We continue to speak with them. And so that interest in taking climate action from some of these Republican members has not gone away. But it's just unlikely that anybody's jumping on any bill right now based on the COVID crisis.
Great. And can you speak to, Ben, what about actions that can be taken to use the economic stimulus to fund climate-friendly actions and programs, or your perspective on that?
It's going to be a long drawn, well, we'll see how long it is. It's definitely going to be a battle in Washington, D.C. to get some of these competing priorities in any future stimulus bills. And a lot of groups are going to weigh in. I'm sure if we have the opportunity, we will weigh in. But some of this was done previously in 2008, where there was a lot of clean energy job stuff in those bills. And there's certainly an appetite for some of that stuff to go in. But the main focus, and this is what leadership is kind of putting out there, is number one thing is the health and safety of Americans right now and the economic hardship standpoint. So they want to make sure that that doesn't, all these competing priorities don't take over from those two main concerns in the near term.
Okay, great. And Dana is wondering if CCL has strong relationships with any of the members of leadership in the House or the Senate.
I think CCL has strong relationships with every members of Congress. Obviously, the chapters are strong in a lot of these places. Mind you, on some leadership, we might not have the best relationship, but we do have, CCL has relationships all over that they've built over the years as constituents.
Great, and there's a question about whether we're working with the Biden team to help them be informed about carbon fee.
Since CCL is not political, we work on a bipartisan fashion. We have not engaged directly with presidential campaigns. We've kind of tried to stay out of that. But as any new administration comes in, we would obviously want them to be informed around carbon pricing. But right in the midst of the campaign, that's something we're actively working on.
Great. Should CCL do more to promote health co-benefits for resilience to future disasters, including pandemics?
That might be a little bit outside CCL's wheelhouse. I mean, we try to stay very focused on climate and have always tried to be even more focused on carbon pricing specifically, even though we do have secondary and supporting asks. But one thing that we have been trying to do is elevate the health costs of climate change and the health benefits to taking action. We do find that's an effective message with members of Congress, and like people care about that. And Dr. Hayhoe had a lot of good information about that stuff, and so that's messaging that we certainly bring in to our work on the Hill and with other groups.
Great. Flannery, this one looks like it might be for you. How does the messaging interact? How does our messaging interact with the Green New Deal?
I'm not sure that I know I need more. I wish I could say more and I could unmute you. In general, CCL's posture with other climate organizations or other climate policies is generally to be encouraging and appreciative of what other people are doing in the climate space. But when we're having conversations at our tabling events or after a presentation that we've given or in our own media that we're working to generate, we generally want to use our messaging to bring attention and to educate people about the climate policy that we support. So I guess my answer is I'm not sure that our messaging does interact with the Green New Deal necessarily. We could certainly give guidance where if someone's asking you about the Green New Deal, we could offer some guidance on how to handle that. But in terms of our messaging itself, that stands alone and is something that you can always turn back to help educate people about what we're working on.
Great, thanks, Flannery. Another question for Ben. I'm reading, says Chris, I'm reading that congressional staffers are receiving more calls and letters that are taking a lot more time to respond to. Given this, are our calls and emails helping our cause or just creating more stress for them?
Well, that's one thing that we really wanted to be cognizant of, because as Mark alluded to earlier, we want to give them the space to respond to this crisis. Like, we do not want to overburden the communications of offices on climate right this moment. That's one reason, like, CCL has always adopted the liaison model, where we have one volunteer that is responsible for doing most of the communication with us outside of those big days where we do want to generate a lot of calls and a lot of emails. And the message we've had is like, we want to be helpful. We want you guys to be safe. And when we get through this, we want to be back in engaging in productive conversation. But so, like, right now is probably not the time to completely fill inboxes. And we have gotten guidance from even Democratic staff that just general calls to take action on climate is not necessarily the most helpful thing right now. But if there are very specific legislative requests, they do want to hear about those when they come up.
This might be a Madeline question, but open to all panelists. How do we respond to social justice, environmental justice groups who make the point that their communities will be the last to benefit from a market-based approach to pricing carbon, since the fossil fuel industry will keep the industries active in their communities the longest?
I think the most important response is to listen and acknowledge the importance of that issue and of the work that they're doing to protect health and vulnerable communities. That listening and validating needs to really come first. The solution that we have, the dividend, we do find is very, very helpful to low-income people. But if we rush to just say, we're going to fix it with the dividend, we're missing important details. So this is one of those cases where really taking time to understand the point of view and history and perspective of the other folks is absolutely critical. and to affirm that shared value that we have of the climate solutions not coming on the backs of the most vulnerable.
Great.
That's a short answer to a very complicated question, but I'm glad it was asked.
Great. And while your video is pinned, Madeline, could you mention that we as CCL are about individual breakthroughs of personal power? This volunteer thinks that many people fear that they may not know enough and that we're not scientists or economists and that they should sit down and be silent and let the important people solve the problems. Can you speak to that?
I think that was beautifully said already, and thank you for reading it, Tamara. Yes, and let's just personalize it. A lot of us sometimes feel inadequate or like other people are doing more or better, but we can all learn and grow, and your voices and your actions make a difference. And so I think try to resist the urge to compare yourself to other people and just do what you can do and support other people to do that. So great point. Glad you highlighted that, you guys.
If our member of Congress is already a climate champion, should we still be reaching out to him or her at this time?
It depends. Like, I think that's a good example of, like, hopefully we build that relationship there, and the relationship should last through the COVID crisis. But it doesn't hurt sometimes to have to just ask, like, what could we be doing that would make your job easier? What could we be doing to be helpful in the climate discussion right now? Because they might have ideas of how CCL could be helpful, and we want to hear those.
Great. Another question for Ben while you're there. What happens to legislators who have supported climate stewardship and then are voted out of office or who have retired from politics?
I guess they're retired. I mean, we lose members of Congress all the time. I mean, we had elections reorder things. We lose champions, we gain champions, and it just changes every 2 years. It's just something, as we seek these big solutions, we just have to be prepared for. We're losing Francis Rooney, who's been a great champion of the bill, and Congressman Lipinski. But there will be new champions to take their place when new members join.
Great. So Deirdre understands that we're pausing the congressional calling campaign, but continuing to meet with congressional staff. Can you speak to this and explain?
Well, the calling campaign was to generate a lot of calls to the central office. There were staff usually that sit and answer the phones and interns that can receive those calls. But right now the offices are shut down. Some offices might have in place some call forwarding ability, but other offices might not. And so we don't want to be just calling a closed office and leaving a bunch of messages. We want to have that more individual contact, and that's what's kind of been taking place. Some calls have taken place with members of Congress that were just one-on-one with volunteers that were previously scheduled. Some have been newly arranged. Some members have expressed that they want to continue having climate conversations, and some members have said to volunteers they don't want to. They want to have the climate conversation after this is over. So it's not a uniform across the board thing. It's very ad hoc how things are playing out right now.
Great. A question for Clara. Bill asks and shares that they have 4 high school students in their chapter, and he's wondering what mission he can give them that will engage their imaginations the best. You're muted, Clara. Don't forget.
Yeah, lots of ideas. If you go to the Citizens Climate Higher Ed website under actions, there's like a list of suggestions for younger people. I really think anything that kind of showcases their voice is great. So stories of why they care about climate change, their photos, their drawings, their stories.
Great.
If I could tag on to that, Tamara.
Yeah, go ahead.
That seems like a perfect opportunity to practice listening and ask the young people what their ideas are and figure out with them what's most exciting to them and kind of take the burden off yourself as the group leader from necessarily having to think of what is it that would excite them. Let's spend time with them to find that out.
Yeah, for sure.
Great. And while
Would
you're
it be okay if I also add something onto that real quick?
sure.
So as a college student myself, I've found that it's really important for anyone in a local CCL chapter that is looking to work with students in middle school, high school, or local colleges to first establish a really strong relationship with those students, be understanding of the fact that their schedules are incredibly demanding and that their academic work always comes first. Even if they have a really strong dedication to climate action, you have to be understanding of the academic schedule that they have. And as Madeline and Clara said, the students themselves will have ideas of how they want to get started. They just may not have the tools and resources to do that. So the best thing that you can do as a local community chapter is to provide that initial mentorship and provide them with the tools and resources and the platform that they need to get started. And then as they begin taking action on their own, you can sort of just act as a guide in giving advice when and if they need it, but not necessarily expressly stating what projects they should be working on.
I want to upvote Jess's answer.
Great. Do we still have time for questions? We still have more time, right?
We do. We have 5 more minutes.
So what are your thoughts on the possibility that passing a carbon fee and dividend plan during this time could help people struggling financially, because the dividend would be a source of income for people not working? Is there a smaller or greater chance that it would hurt more than help?
There certainly has been some discussion. I mean, this has been an ongoing policy debate in Washington for some time, that if you were looking for a pot of money, one of the last big pots of money left is a carbon price. And so we expect that as policymakers look at the costs of some of these things, look at the deficit, carbon pricing will kind of come up as part of the policy discussions. But we have not seen, as I've said, like, we're so much still in the middle of this current crisis. The idea of passing something like that right now, I think, is very hard for legislators to wrap their heads around. They want to first do no harm, and second, like, respond to the immediate wounds of the economy, and then I think they will be able to come and start having those more long-term discussions that could involve something like a carbon price with a dividend.
Great. Ben, we've seen this question a number of times. Given that oil prices are so low, how much does carbon pricing matter right now?
I have not yet heard like an economist say that a carbon price still isn't a good idea. Obviously, it's going to change some of the modeling, and we have already been in contact with researchers and folks that do model and work on some of this stuff to try to get a better picture of how these low fuel prices will affect carbon pricing. But we do know before, for instance, the transportation was always one of the hardest sectors to get in the near term with a carbon price. So that could be something we need to look at more. But at the same time, oil prices always fluctuate, and this could be more temporary than people believe. But it is something we are very cognizant of.
Great. Flannery, this one could be something that you could speak to. It's somewhat of a marketing question as well, but Jocelyn mentions that they've seen climate groups working with influencers to create merchandise that brings awareness to the issues as well as generates some money for the efforts. Maybe something that would popularize climate change awareness with groups who wouldn't normally even think about it. So do you have any thoughts? I mean, I know we are very laser focused on the bill, and at the same time wanting to involve other groups in a way that perhaps they haven't been involved before. Do you want to speak to that?
Sure. You're right that it's more marketing. I am communications, and that is definitely squarely in the marketing side of things. But I would just say that it's we're always, open to creativity coming from our volunteers and folks that are out in the field, seeing seeing what's going on and seeing things that might work. And so if there's something that you wanted to try at the local level and see if it helped you make those connections or generate additional interest or something like that, and you were finding some success there, then I'd say go for it and let us know about it so that we can consider new techniques and tactics that will help us advance our goals.
Great.
Excellent. And Tamara, I think we've got time for one more question.
Okay, no pressure. Ben, I choose this one by Frank. When the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act gets signed by a president, how long will it take to be in effect?
The wheels start turning immediately. Any law that gets passed has to go through a formal rulemaking process because the agencies charged with implementing it have to figure out some of the details. No bill has all those details in it. That's in the rulemaking process, but those bills will start turning immediately. But it usually takes anywhere from 1 to 2 years for new things to get implemented. So there is a certain lag there.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. Really appreciate our panelists taking the time today to jump on, and of course, all of our participants out there for joining and spending this Saturday with us. You are the important people out there. You are the ones who are making this happen. Really appreciate you spending this Saturday with us, and thank you for all you do for the planet.